Hey, I'm Disconnected, and as you could hear, I will be talking about CPython bugs. So a few words about me. I work as a senior security engineer at 12bits. 12bits is a company where we perform security audits for our customers and also do a lot of security research in blockchain and cryptography and like application security space. I also play capture the flag competitions. So those are security competitions where you play as a team and like solve some security challenges. And I do a lot of low-level stuff and a little bit of reverse engineering when I have time. And I also contribute to some open source projects. I also have a blog on the internet, but it's not very active. Yep. So a quick question first. Who has ever been on this website? Raise your hand. OK, lots of you. That's good. So this is the Python's bug tracker. And it looks like this, or maybe looked like this, because currently it says that it migrated to GitHub. And is currently read-only. But yeah, here are some recent stats from it. Well, obviously, it's closed already, so the stats are ending when it closed. But as you can see, there are like maybe around 60 to 80 bugs that are being opened on each month. And sometimes more of those are closed, sometimes less. I mean, in terms of numbers, are closed. But there are still plenty of bugs that are opened for like a lot of years. So let's go to those bugs. The first one I want to show you is about the Readline module. And the problem is that Readline module is loaded in interactive mode in Python. And this is an issue that was reported in 2011, and it also like exists in Python 2 and 3. And let's maybe see how it works. So the problem with Readline is that Readline is a library that is being used for, well, reading lines. And you basically read lines whenever you type something in the interpreter, right? So Readline is a library written in C that is being used by CPython whenever you use your interpreter. And the problem with it is that if you have some file like this written in C, where you, well, include some stuff, then you create a function, and you, well, have some content here like that prints some hacked and then does some fancy stuff. And you add this attribute constructor here. And now if you compile it properly with like into a shared library that you will call libreadline so. Now if you open Python, I can maybe also open another console with a netcat. Oh, wait, -L for listen. Yep, so if you now open Python after we have compiled this library in C, so now you open Python interpreter. OK, it did not work. Wait, why? It should have been working. Oh, sorry, it shouldn't be libreadline so, it should be readline so, right? So now if you open Python, it basically will execute whatever you had in this constructor function in this shared library. So when can this actually be a problem? This can be a problem whenever you are an admin, you log into your server, and then you go to some uploads directory, and you want to, for example, process some files in Python interpreter. And someone uploaded you this readline so library, then something like this can, well, trigger and execute. And it's likely unwanted. Someone could say it's a feature. By the way, it's maybe not really well seen here, but in this constructor, I have done this. And this is called a reverse shell. So I'm invoking a bash process here so that it will basically spawn bash and forward its std in and std out to this TCP socket. By the way, this dev TCP is a magic path supported by bash. So on the other console, I actually have this shell being spawned, well, the Python interpreter connected here, and now I can execute some commands. So this, this could be an attacker server on the bottom, and on the top it could be the admin server, right? Yeah, so this is really weird. This shouldn't really work like this. Yeah, and there is another catch. So we can also investigate how this works more or less. If only I will close it. OK, I closed this. OK, let me do. So you can investigate it using strace on Linux. strace is a tool to basically trace system calls on Linux. So there is this open add system call whenever a file is being opened. And you can do something like this. I need to forward std error into std out because strace is printing things on std error. So if I launch strace like this, it will basically show me all the files that the Python interpreter has opened with this open add syscall. There are also other syscalls like open, but we don't really care about them. But I also want to grab these results for looking into .so. So I only want to see whenever it loads like shared objects, so dynamically loaded libraries in C. So if we do this, we can see that this Readline SO is being loaded here, right? And some other libraries that are standard libraries used by C programs, as CPython is a C program. If I type something in this interpreter and press enter, there are much more libraries that are being loaded, which means that the interpreter first loads some libraries, and then it will load even more of them whenever you will actually type something in and press enter. So as you can see, here are some weird, a lot of libraries are there, right? And for example, there's this busy2, LZMA, hashlib. There should also be like SSL library loaded, JSON library. So it turns out that those libraries can also be loaded from the current working directory, which means that if we come back to our readline example, I can remove this one because this one was really not really used, and rename it to, for example, json.so. It could also be this longer name that we have seen in strace. And now type Python 3, nothing happened, right? The payload did not get executed, I mean the malicious code. But if I type something in, the interpreter will load the code, and now it will also invoke this malicious library. So there are a few libraries that works like that. As I said, for example, the busy2, LZMA, JSON, SSL. So can we actually mitigate this? Well, the answer is yes. And we can look over the CPython source code for the function that actually imports the readline module. It's called pymine import readline, and we can see here this import module. So this actually also, I think this will also try to load readline.py. I'm not sure. Someone should probably try it. But the thing is that if there is an .so library that looks for Python as a valid shared object, then it will load it from current working directory. And there are some if conditions here that we can skip this loading of readline module. And one of this is this config isolated, and that's called an isolate mode in Python. And if you look over the Python documentation or Python --help, you will see this -i, where it says that it will run Python in isolated mode. What it means that it will also imply -e and -s, because there are two separate flags for the two different things. But basically, this isolate mode will never add the current working directory into your sys.path. So it might be a good idea to actually alias your Python interpreter, like alias Python, Python -i, at least for your root user, because you never want to compromise the root user. Well, others as well, of course. And now if you do, OK, Python 3 won't really. OK, so Python 3. Do I have an alias for Python 3 now? Or did it just work because Python 3 links to Python 3? Let me maybe close this console and try again. OK, so Python 3, oh, wait, it's executing this payload here. So if I do Python 3 -i and then type something in, nothing happened. It didn't really load this library right now. And by the way, this library should, of course, be also loaded with Python 2, but it doesn't work. But if we would change it to readline SO and the Python, now it's loaded in Python 2. So this _JSON _busy2 only works in Python 3. But readline SO works in both. So that's one way to mitigate this. But actually, there was a pull request on May about fixing this. And it's already merged. But where the hell it's merged? I mean, in which Python versions is it fixed? So in GitHub, if you go to like the pull request, you then have this like merged commit on the bottom. You click on this, and then you can see the actual versions it's merged in. So it's merged into 3.11, but some like beta versions because 3.11 is not released yet. So I suppose this will be fixed in 3.11. But until then, it might be good to use this isolate mode for this. OK, so let's maybe look at another issue that is there. This another issue is called, well, there's a GitHub, the backtracker issue for this, and this is called deprecate and remove code execution in PTH files, which AKA stands more or less for code execution whenever you install a package and then launch a Python interpreter, and not even import this package. And it was reported in 2018. And thanks to Artur Cherpiel for this one, because he noticed me about this one. But what are the PTH files? It turns out there is, of course, a documentation page for it in the site library or module. So the PTH files are basically path configuration files. And they can exist in some directories that are mentioned in the documentation. And the contents of this file are additional items to be added to sys.path. But that's not everything. If you go further, it says that blank lines and lines beginning with comments are skipped, OK. But lines starting with import followed by space or tab are executed. Lines starting with import. So first it says that the PTH files are path configuration files where you basically add something to syspath, and then it says that you can also execute lines starting with import. And there's a note that an executable line in PTH file is run at every Python startup, regardless whether a particular module is actually going to be used. So you start Python, you don't import a module, but the PTH files are, the lines that are executable are executed. There is an explanation why it's there. The primary intended purpose of executable lines is to make the corresponding modules importable. Because you may have some kind of like import hooks or adjust the path environment variable, or it may be required for your module. So that's the reason why this feature is there. But this feature is a bit problematic. So if we would like to test this feature, or a bug, or maybe just not a great design, we can install this library, pip install delivery method. It's written by Artur, by the way, and you can see it on GitHub. But I would not really recommend you doing this. But we can do it here. So yeah, now I am on directory upper, so there is no this. So the lib readline issue is not there anymore. So if I do pip install delivery method, I'm installing this Artur's package. And now if I type Python 3, there is some payload delivered print that is going on here. OK, so how does this work? We can actually see the package's contents if you do pip show files and the package name. And by the way, this also executes the payload. And the package is installed in this directory, and here are all the files that are in this package. So there is this AAAAA underscore deliver method.pth file there. So let's look at its contents. Yep, and if we go to this file, it basically does import sys and import deliver method. OK, so what does import deliver method do? Because that's the package, right? So deliver method py is also there, and it just prints this payload delivered. So this is how it works. But it's a bit more scary because they said that the Python lines here are executed if they begin with import. So can I do this? Print something. And if I save it, it should just now work. And as you can see, I printed ASD there in this PTH file. So it's not really a .py file, but a PTH file, and some lines of it are executed. Actually, not all of the lines, because if I would not start a line with import, but if I would start it with just print, it would not be executed. Because that's also what the documentation said, that the line has to start with import. So if we go to the to source code, how it works, there is this add package function that is being responsible for processing these PTH files within the site packages directory. And it opens the file and then it enumerates over its lines. And if the line starts with comment, it just continues. But if it starts with import or import tab or import space, it will execute the line with exec. So this is how it works. And so they said that some modules may be using it, right? And they should use it. They should use the PTH files basically to add to syspath, or maybe to import something. But there's this unintended feature that you can execute code as well. So let's see some packages that actually leverage this feature, or maybe a bug. So for example, the pytest conf package, it does something like this in its PTH file. And it's a module for pytest to get code coverage from your tests. And so it first imports OS and sys and then executes some code. If some environment variable is there, then it will import init and initialize something. It seems this is something related to sub-process coverage. No idea what's that for there, but yeah. Another example is the Hunter module. So Hunter is some module that can be used for tracing your Python code, and it also executes some code, even simpler, right? It just executes some underscore private method from its own module. So can we actually prevent this behavior? Because it's a bit creepy or scary. So there was this PEP 648 that was proposed some time ago. And it's actually, it says that, extensible customizations of the interpreter at startup, they wanted to improve this thing. Maybe not necessarily disable it completely, but definitely make it better. But its status is rejected. And it got rejected because it has a limited number of use cases and further complicates the startup sequence. OK. There is another way we can do it. We can use the isolate mode again here. So if I go back here, I have this. Wait, where is this module? Did I remove it? Oh, I need an import here, right? OK, so this is being executed. But if we do Python 3 -i, so isolated mode, this is not happening anymore. So this is how we can mitigate it. But yeah, note that this bug is about deprecate and remove code execution in PTH files. So they don't really want to execute all the code. They want the syspath appended feature being there, but they also want the import feature being there. So likely the PTH files are going to stay there, but they don't want this any code being executed in there. There was also a proposal to skip lines that have this not colon, I don't remember the character in it, but it was not really implemented. So we will see how it goes. It's already 4 years since it was reported, but it's still there. The next issue is about socket inet add-on function. And it has some parsing issues on some libc versions. And I reported it in 2019. It's still there. But yeah, let's see at the documentation for this function. So socket inet add-on is actually function that is taken from libc, from the C library. And what it does, it converts an IP string, IPv4 address from its string representation to the 32-bit packed binary format. So how does this work? If I do Python 3 or Python here, import socket inet add-on, and do this, you will get the binary representation for this IP address. There are also more features into it. It also accepts strings with less than 3 dots. You can have an IP address like this, and it will map in a weird way. You can even have this. You can even have some fancy number like this. This is treated as an IP address. By the way, at some point, web browsers also accepted this. I'm not sure if they still do. But yeah, it could sometimes allow to bypass some IP validation where IP was validated by just a string. Yeah, and there are some other weird things into it. And by the way, yeah, if you pass in an incorrect IP like this, or maybe like this, whoops, why did it work? This is not a valid IP address here, but it actually worked. And this is something unwanted, especially if you may expect that if you use this function, that it will properly validate your IP address if it's a valid IP address. But apparently it does not. And now imagine such code on production, where you are taking the IP string from some requests, and then you do an if condition or maybe a try except, because, well, it throws an error here, an exception. And you do something like this, OS system ping, blah, blah, blah. So where could such a code appear? Well, maybe in routers, and this was actually the case. But it was not really in Python, it was in C. There was a C code that used this function. And if you have something like this, os.system ping plus the IP string, then you can bypass the command here, and you can execute arbitrary code whenever you pass a malicious IP address. And this was found by Blasty, for whom I also checked this issue in CPython. So I looked into CPython, how it uses socket inetaton. And by the way, it's very important that this function is broken only in the glibc implementation, at least I believe. I'm not sure why exactly we are getting here this on Mac, so maybe it's also in the LLVM's implementation as well. But for example, if you use Musl or microlibc, it won't be there. I mean, this won't really be supported on those other versions. Yeah, so there are the differences in libc implementations, obviously. So how it's used in Python. So there was this issue in the ssl.matchHostname function in CPython, where if you did something like this, so you wanted to match a hostname for a given certificate that should match a given IP address, it was matching it. So this could actually be a security issue, because you may want to do some IP filtering or match the certificate's hostname. But we didn't find any case where it was actually exploitable, where someone could actually leverage this and do something malicious. But it is already fixed, and in this SSL library, the pull request is merged. But I also found another case in the requests library. So I guess everyone knows requests. It's a library for sending HTTP requests. But the thing is, it also has some utility functions. So for example, you can find out if a given IP address belongs to a given network, or if it's an IPv4 address, and so on. And it's broken here, as you can see. I reported it some time ago, but nobody cared. So it's there, so maybe don't really use those functions. And another thing I wanted to show you is this crypt.crypt function on macOS. So this crypt.crypt function is basically broken on macOS, and we can see it here. If I import crypt, maybe let's do it in IPython. Yeah, so first of all, let's see the documentation string for it. So the crypt.crypt is supposed to return a string representation representing the one-way hash of a password with a salt prepended. So maybe let's see how it works on Linux first. No, my payload is still executing here. So if I do something like this, and just to remember, the first argument is the word, so a password, and then you pass in a salt, which actually it uses some method that you specify there. Yeah, so if we execute this crypt.crypt like this, whoops, wrong. Yeah, so if we execute it like this, we are getting the password hashed with a given hashing method. There's a default one. And the salt is prepended here, somewhere here. So the salt this is actually the salt, whatever is between the $2. And the salt is randomized, and then you have the hash of that password with this salt, with a given method. And by the way, you can find out this method with like man5 crypt, and you can look for like $6, for example, and $6 corresponds to SHA-512 crypt, so SHA-2 with 500-bit output. And yeah, there's a format as well for this. But if we execute it in macOS, what happens? It gives us some weird output. And we don't really see any salt being prepended here, even no method. So what is going on in here? The thing is that this Crypt module, wait, I need to do 2 asterisks here, or not? Yep. It has this .methods member, which tells you what are the Crypt methods that you are supporting. And on macOS, there is only one method here. On Linux, you will have much more of them. So as you can see, it's basically using a different default method, and you can't even use any other method that is there. So on Linux, you can do something like ABC, and then probably crypt method crypt, I believe. And you will get the same output as on macOS, right? So this is a different crypt method. I don't really remember which one is that, but it's probably not very secure if it uses only this amount of bytes for hashing, right? It's probably brutable, like you can brute force it. But on macOS, you can't really do other methods because you don't have them supported. So if you try to do something like, wait, what was the name? Like this, oh, wait, it actually worked. So this is even more interesting because it worked only partially. Because as you can see, the output is still truncated here. So it's even more broken because you are getting now something it's supposed to be hashed, but you're only seeing part of its salt, and this salt is it's for some reason constant for a given input. Or maybe maybe it's still using the old method. I'm not sure. But it's basically broken, so you should really not use it if you want your code to be cross-platform. And if you go to the Crypt library's documentation, it says that it's deprecated since 3.11. So there is this PEP 594 that details some alternatives, but you should definitely use an alternative which is using hashlib module instead. Because why would you use the crypt method, which is broken, basically? And that's all that I wanted to show you. So for a quick summary, be careful whenever you are using Python, invoking Python interpreter in random directories where there may be some files that you are not aware of what are those, because there is this libreadline SO and some other SOs or shared objects that may be loaded. I haven't really checked whether this is also about like macOS or Windows, but I suppose it's probably yes. But it's going to be fixed in Python 3.11, and you can also use isolate mode, so it may be good to do this alias here. Then there's also this PTH files, so path configuration files, that may execute code on each Python startup. So isolate mode helps as well here, but other than that, then there is no solution yet. Then there's this socket inet atom that you should not really use. So if you want to parse an IP address, you should probably use some IP address module instead of just a pure libc function. Because even though you may want to use something more low level and probably faster, it doesn't really work properly, as you can see. Or it's supposed to work properly because like the documentation states that those functions are like just dispatching the calls into libc, and whatever libc does is supposedly the correct solution. But I wouldn't say so. And the request module has still this bug when they use this socket inet atom. And there is this crypt being broken on macOS. And if you want to see the slides from the presentation, there is the link at the bottom that you can use, and it has also the code for demos. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, please line up if you have questions. Is there anyone online with a question?
Thank you for the talk. I definitely learned a few things. I wanted to ask about the first bug. Is it because it's on the Python path, or is it because in the current working directory?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We can actually go to the pull request that fixes it, because that's probably the easiest. Wait, I didn't link it here, so we can probably do something like, oh, I have it, a link to it here. Yeah, so if we go to how it's being fixed, yeah, I need to make it larger, of course. They basically moved this import they basically moved this call to PyMain import readline to an earlier place in the code. And this is because here, I believe here, or maybe somewhere between those two differences, they are adding the current working directory to the syspath. So yes, indeed, this is exactly it. That's why the module is imported, because the current working directory is on the syspath whenever it's being imported. And this, they made this unintended mistake that allowed for this behavior.
That probably means that I could simplify the code by just putting some Python there. I don't need to compile C extension.
Probably. I'm not sure. We can actually check this out very fast. I think it didn't work back then, but wait, did I name it SO? Sorry, guys. Yeah, so this is how it looks, and yeah, it actually executed. But now it gives you this attribute error here that you broke the readline module.
So my question is, if they just move the importing the readline only, does it fix the underscore JSON and other such libraries as well?
That's a good question. And if I would have PyEnv here, I would install 3.11 and test it out. But I don't. Could probably maybe do something like let's see what's the network here. If I have network. I have network, but it is probably too slow. Oh, wait, I need to stand. This will take a bit, but I can do it maybe like this. Oh, I don't have, OK, different machine. Oh, maybe there is no image for Python 3.11 yet.
You probably have to specify beta version.
Maybe. Well, we can see it in Docker Hub, if they have it here, because that would be the fastest way to check it out. There is some Python 3.11. It should always be right.
You missed Python.
Yeah, I missed Python, right? Thank you. I probably need to launch sh, or maybe just Python, because maybe this, well, we'll see if this image has bash inside. They also don't have Vim there, so I would need to do something like this in order to test it. Wait, I would actually need to compile something. Let's see if we can do it very fast. Wait, GCC is installed there. So now we need this, maybe install Vim again. Yeah, if there is another question, I can maybe answer one fast one, but in the meantime.
Yeah, I was wondering if you use -i, is it Python still very usable? Can you use virtual environments still? Or?
It's a good question. We can see. I should have an environment here. Yeah, it is there. In this environment, I can import pawn, whatever that is, by the way. So if I do Python -I and import pawn, it still works. The thing is that you won't be able to import whatever you have here. So if I have a module like A here in my current working directory, I can't really import it. And normally I would be able to. So that's the issue here that is happening. Yeah, so coming back to this. Sorry? I am in Docker. This shows me that I am in the Docker container. Sorry, it's not supposed to be libc, it's supposed to be JSON. So maybe it's fixed. Maybe, because I don't know. Oh, wait. Yeah, we have to write something for JSON. So it seems it's probably fixed. Yeah, there are only one Python here. So it seems it's fixed. But you never know, because this behavior is hard to detect, basically. Maybe if trace, well, let's maybe not trace it here. Yep. Any more questions?
Any questions online? No? Right. Anyone in the room still have anything they'd like to ask?
Or any comments?
Well, if not, let's thank Disconnected for this fantastic talk.
Thank you.